This November 25th is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence against Women. The day is meant to raise awareness and condemn all violence against women, including rape and other domestic abuse. Here in France, a woman is killed by her partner every 2.5 days. Well, this year the day is particularly focusing on violence caused by the effects of COVID-19. And to talk a bit more about all of this with me, I'm joined on the set by Annette Young, the host of the 51%, our France 24 show about women reshaping our world. Annette, welcome. Always a pleasure to have you on. Now, with the pandemic, domestic abuse rates across the world have surged. Can you give us the numbers?
In short, it's pretty bad. And when you think about it, Jeannie, sadly, it's pretty obvious, because what it is a situation where you're forcing women and children who are suffering from domestic violence to be locked indoors with the people who are the perpetrators. So from a spike in rapes in Nigeria and South Africa, increased number of women missing in Peru, high rates of women being killed in Brazil and Mexico, and overwhelmed help or aid organisations in Europe, the pandemic has clearly aggravated this plague of violence. Now, just to give you a sense, Jeannie, of just the extent of this, I've actually pulled together some figures, and we should see a graphic at this point, from the UN Women. It shows that calls to violence against women hotlines increased fivefold in the first few weeks of the pandemic. For every 3 months the lockdown continues, an additional 15 million women across the world are expected to be affected by violence. And with the pandemic, an increased reporting of domestic abuse and violence surfaced, with, in some cases, reaching a staggering 40% in some countries. Now, worldwide, the United Nations is saying that only 1 country in 8 has taken measures to lessen the impact of the pandemic's impact on women and children, and roughly about 20% of those countries analysed had no gender-sensitive measures at all. Only 25 countries, 12% that is, introduced measures to cover all areas. And you're talking about things such as provision of helplines, shelters, judicial responses to counter the surge in violence, cash transfers, the provision of childcare services and so on. And there's certainly been some standout cases as well. For instance, in Spain, victims could discreetly seek assistance by going into pharmacies and saying the code Mask 19. And some French associations establish a similar sort of system here in France with supermarkets, but a lot of countries have not, and the fear is that as a result we could see a rollback in many areas.
It's incredible in today's world, and what we hear and see in these numbers that you just showed us is how huge a problem this still is today in 2020. Is there a need for some sort of societal shift? Do we have to change people's mindsets to stop this from happening?
You know, it's a big, big question, and the culture of impunity still prevails. I mean, you said it, 20 years into the 21st century, here we are, we're having a day every year asking for the elimination of violence against women and girls. And I want to flip it, because I would argue that we stand here every year, my French colleague and I, and we come onto the set and we talk about these horrific statistics, and of course made all that more horrific by the pandemic. But there really isn't the emphasis, we would argue, for those who are carrying out the violence. What do you need to do to shift that whole cultural mindset? And I mean, when you look at those statistics, they cut across every income class, every minority community, every country. And obviously what needs to be done is to get men and boys to realise that violence against women is not acceptable. And there is a British academic in recent years who's actually established the 7 stages of behaviour that lead to the eventual murder of women. And it begins a lot with what is called coercive control, which is surveillance, controlling behaviour, isolating the victim as such. And they make up the majority of domestic violence cases. And so you're having to educate men and boys in schools, but you're also having to educate everybody about what is appropriate behaviour and what is not. And at the end of the day, that women are not property of their husbands or their partners, or, you know, of these perpetrators who can be treated as they like.
Annette, thanks so much for that. It sounds so simple, but again, the message has still yet to get through. Thank you for your continuing work on the 51%. Annette Young.